Today, in Chapter 34 and Chapter 35 of Brihad Parashara Hora Shastra, we will discuss Yoga Karaka planets, the mathematics of power, fortune, and Raja Yoga. What we're exploring here isn't just abstract philosophy. It is a highly structured mathematical system designed to calculate the exact vectors of human success. In these chapters, Maharishi Parashara lays out precise formulas to determine exactly which planetary combinations yield true authority and which ones strip it away. It's essentially an intricate geometric puzzle, and today we're going to decode how to read and construct these diagrams of fortune.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To understand the formula for kingship, we first have to define our primary variables. In the architecture of a Vedic chart, there are two main functional zones. First, we have the kendras, or the centers. These are houses 1, 4, 7, and 10. Think of these as the executive branches of a chart. They drive direct action, your career, and your public presence in the material world. Second, we have the trikonas, or trines. These are houses 1, 5, and 9. These represent your inherent capital, your intellect, your grace, and your accumulated merits. So simply put, the center is what you do, and the trine is what you inherently possess.
Now, the crucial point is how these two distinct forces interact. The foundational axiom of Chapter 34 states that true power, Raja Yoga, is mathematically forged only when the lords of a center and a trine unite. If we parse the original Sanskrit, yoga translates to union, and karka means the maker or the doer. So a yoga karka is an agent of supreme fortune, but it's born not from a single isolated planet, but through the geometric union of action and inherent grace. When a planet owning a kendra connects with a planet owning a trikona, whether that's through a direct conjunction, a mutual aspect, or an exchange of signs, an undeniable multiplier effect is triggered. It generates high-level status and capability. Now for our first major topic, ascendant variables. The equation of power we just discussed is not static. It shifts entirely depending on your starting point, which is the ascendant. Because the zodiac is fixed, but the ascendant constantly moves, the planets shift their lordships over those centers and trines for every single rising sign. Looking at the original text for the Gemini ascendant, we see a really fascinating rule. We parse that Mars, Jupiter, and the Sun actually function mathematically as malefics here. Why is that? Well, for Gemini, Jupiter rules the 7th and 10th houses, both centers, so it loses its natural beneficence through a rule literally translated as Kendra Hepati Dosha, or the blemish of center lordship. Mars rules the 6th and 11th, which are houses of conflict. Meanwhile, the text explicitly highlights that Venus stands completely alone as the single most auspicious force for Gemini, because it commands the 5th house trine, bringing in pure, unadulterated creative and intellectual capital. Now, for a Gemini native, the moon actually becomes the prime killer, or Maraka. It rules the 2nd house of accumulated wealth, which, believe it or not, is also a primary death-inflicting house in astrological mathematics. But, and this is key, its actual mathematical output is highly dependent on its planetary associations. If the moon is conjunct a pure malefic, its literal Maraka or killer tendency is fully activated. But if it aligns with Venus, its energy is modified. So for Gemini, analyzing the chart is an exercise in weighing these really delicate associations against the stark, hard rules of lordship.
Transitioning over to the Libra ascendant, the underlying geometric logic shifts yet again. The source text dictates that for Libra, the moon and Mercury combine to execute the Raja Yoga. Here, Mercury rules the 9th house, trine of fortune, and the moon rules the 10th house, center of executive action. Their union flawlessly satisfies principle 1. Conversely, Jupiter, which, remember, is naturally the most benevolent planet in astrology, acts as a dire malefic for Libra. This is because it rules the 3rd and 6th houses of struggle, disease, and laborious effort. This brilliantly illustrates the elegance of Parashara's mathematics. What works perfectly for Libra completely inverts for the very next sign, Scorpio. For a Scorpio ascendant, the sun and the moon become the ultimate yoga karakas, the absolute vectors of success. The sun rules the 10th house center, and the moon rules the 9th house trine. Meanwhile, Venus, which was the lone saving grace for Gemini, and the ascendant lord for Libra, suddenly shifts into a death-dealing malefic for Scorpio, simply because it commands the 7th and 12th houses. The philosophical meaning behind this specific Scorpio verse is really profound. The text notes a critical exception to the standard rules of calculation. Usually, if a malefic planet owns a Kendra, it needs to also own a trine to become a true yoga karaka. However, because the luminaries, the sun and the moon, only own one sign each, they bypassed these standard rules entirely. For Scorpio, they don't need a dual lordship to grant power. They act as pure, unadulterated vectors of fortune, directly channeling the absolute highest executive and inherent grace right into the native's life.
Moving strictly into Chapter 35, we encounter the Nabhasa Yogas. These are overarching planetary formations that operate completely independently of standard period lordships.
These Nabhasa Yogas, with Nabhasa translating literally to the sky or heavens, form the permanent underlying scaffolding of a person's entire life trajectory, regardless of changing time periods. The text outlines some incredibly strict geometric proofs here. For instance, if 3 angles are occupied exclusively by benefic planets, it produces a Malala Yoga. Malala literally translates to a garland, indicating this beautiful, continuous loop of prosperity and comfort. But if those exact same angles hold malefics, it creates a Sarpa, or a Bhujanga Yoga. This translates literally to a serpent, meaning the native's life is wrapped up in continuous struggle and constriction. It's a pure visual mathematical proof. The fundamental nature of the planets occupying your centers directly dictates the flow, or the friction, of your actions.
That brings us to our next major concept, the advanced theorem of the Kara-Kamsa ascendant. To calculate the absolute most precise vectors of fortune, we have to project our data into this advanced realm. This requires us to identify the soul's primary agent in the chart and track its microposition. The researcher's definition in our source text is incredibly clear on this. The Kara-Kamsa is the specific Navamsha sign occupied by the Atmakarka. So first, you calculate the Atmakarka. In Sanskrit, Atma means soul and Karka means significator. It is simply the planet holding the highest mathematical degree in any sign in your main birth chart. It is, essentially, the king of your chart. You take that planet, find exactly which sign it sits in within the Navamsha divisional chart, and that specific sign becomes your Kara-Kamsa. By establishing this point, you create a powerful secondary ascendant. The Kara-Kamsa acts as a highly sensitive focal point, essentially an alternative lens through which the entire chart can be read and understood. The text actually equates it in importance to the natal ascendant itself. By treating the Kara-Kamsa as house number 1, we can map out specific alignments that reveal exactly where the soul's deepest desires and its greatest material payouts are mathematically destined to manifest. And this brings us directly to a crucial verse in our analysis. Shloka 9 provides a direct mathematical theorem. Immense, mathematically assured wealth is calculated directly through the 11th house from this Kara-Kamsa point. The literal translation states that if specific planetary conditions are met in the 11th house, known as the Labe, or house of gains, counted from the Kara-Kamsa, the native is absolutely guaranteed profound financial fortune. It's a powerful Danya Yoga. Basically, it's a pinpointed coordinate for wealth generation.
Now, while the literal translation simply points to a house placement, the astrological and practical significance here is massive. The 11th house naturally rules gains, networks, and the realization of desires. When you look at the 11th house from the Kara-Kamsa, any benefic planet placed there or even aspecting that house acts as a massive multiplier for the native's lifelong capital accumulation. In modern terms, this is literally the exact coordinate you check for massive liquid gains, successful venture capital, and the realization of ultimate financial yield.
So, how do we put this all together? Let's walk through the strict step-by-step geometric construction required to actually map these ancient diagrams of fortune.
Using the traditional North Indian diamond-shaped framework, we construct our map. The top central diamond is always the first house, the ascendant. We first map the foundational centers, the middle diamonds, representing houses 1, 4, 7, and 10. Then we map the trines, houses 1, 5, and 9. We do this to visually confirm if Principle 1, the union of power, is actively playing out in the base chart. We are literally drawing geometric lines between the lords of these houses to see if they intersect. Diagramming a Yaga Karaka requires strict adherence to this sequence. Step 1. Isolate the ascendant to define your baseline rules, like figuring out whether Jupiter is a friend or a killer for this specific chart. Step 2. Track the specific lords of the centers and trines. Step 3. Geometrically confirm their union. Are they sitting in the same house? Are they looking at each other from opposite sides of the chart? If that connection is verified, the formula is complete and the Raja Yoga is activated.
As we advance our diagramming, we look at the commentary on page 388 of our source text. It clearly instructs that if we are evaluating Raja Yogas, specifically from the Karaka-Amsa ascendant, the status of the Putra Karaka must also be mathematically integrated into the equation. The Putra Karaka, where Putra translates to child or creation, is the planet holding the 5th highest degree in the chart. Just as the 5th lord is absolutely vital from the natal ascendant, the Putra Karaka acts as the primary trinal energy when analyzing from the Karaka Amsa. Their mutual relationship defines the ultimate status output. So to chart the specific Dhan Yoga, the wealth combination from Shloka 9, we follow this strict sequence. First, pinpoint the Atmakaraka's exact degree in the main chart. Second, plot its placement into the Navamsa chart to establish the Karakamsa sign. Third, project forward precisely 11 houses from that specific sign in the Navamsa. That 11th house is your target zone. You must diagram the planets sitting there and the planets aspecting it to calculate the true financial yield.
The practical application of diagramming this 11th house from the Karakamsa really cannot be overstated. The text described this sector as the source of royal patronage. In a modern context, assessing this specific 11th house gives us a concrete data point for predicting institutional backing, large-scale venture capital success, and the ultimate realization of a person's efforts. It takes the very abstract concept of luck and completely grounds it in a verifiable mathematical location in the chart.
But before finalizing any of your calculations, you absolutely must apply the strict exceptions to the formula provided in chapters 34 and 35. You have to constrain the data. Remember, the luminaries, the sun and moon, are weighted differently because they only own one sign. Malefics that own centers lose their sting, essentially becoming neutral. And above all, the union of a center and a trine is absolutely mandatory to calculate any enduring power. Missing these constraints will result in a fundamentally flawed analysis.
Ultimately, the philosophical aim of all these intricate calculations isn't just about temporary wealth or a fleeting promotion at work. As the text notes regarding the lords of the trines, or Lakshmi Asthanas, this mathematics directly relates to divine splendor. The mapping of these yoga karakas and Karakahamsa coordinates is the mapping of enduring power, charting a legacy and a divine status that transcends a single lifetime. It's really about aligning human action with universal geometry.
So we've decoded the formulas for kingship and fortune from chapters 34 and 35. We've seen exactly how a planet can be a kingmaker for one person and a massive obstacle for another, all based entirely on mathematical lordship. But the final variable remains unsolved until you apply this ancient calculus to your own chart. If the mathematics of power rely entirely on your personal geometric starting point, what does the arrangement of your centers and trines dictate about your legacy?